writer. Tell us a little bit more about your writing background. Where, when, and how did you start writing?
Okay, the goal was always to be a writer. The first novel I ever read, and with only the semi-permission of my parents, was Stephen King's Misery. And I was about 8.5, 9 years old at the time. And people who know me today say that explains a lot about why you are the way that you are today. And from that age, I'd always wanted to be a writer. I do read a great deal. And toward the end of high school, a Toastmasters group came and did a speech course and a leadership development course in my high school. And I was unaware at the time that you could actually make a full-time career out of professional speaking. And as a result of that, I ended up segueing into this world of presenting and of business speaking. And that then enabled me to write the books as well. So there's this wonderful pairing between the world of public speaking and the world of writing, where your speeches sell your books and your books sell further presentations, and it works very well together. So today I write predominantly business books, but when I say business, some of them are aimed at a very corporate level, discussing ideas like innovation, and some are much more personal in nature and would discuss things like personal wealth concepts. So that's the very quick nutshell version of the story.
So you went from school straight into learning about public speaking and going straight into writing. You made a career of this right from the word go. It wasn't kind of like an afterthought or something that happened by default.
As with most things in life, never quite as clean as that. It was a little messier.
Okay.
I did about a year and a half working as a Caxton journalist for one of the community newspapers, and perhaps about a year and a half as well of radio presenting. And at the same time, I was building up this background with speaking and so forth, and then went full-time with the speaking. And as a result of that, I was able to build up enough credibility to approach a group like Penguin and say, here's an idea for a book, what do you think? And publishers typically respond very well to a personality who has some degree of a coaching, training, speaking, or in any sense, a public career. If you're able to market your books as a natural part of what you do, they tend to look on that quite favorably.
Okay, so that's a big plus to have, because I know that's one of the biggest drawbacks that many writers have, is that they spend agonizing years writing something precious. And then the actual marketing of yourself and your book falls flat on its face. And let's face it, it's a very backstabbing market, if I could put it that way. It seems that sometimes you can't even get beyond a phone call to an editor to try and market your piece.
Certainly, speakers have a great fear. I think traditionally speakers tend to fear other human beings, which is why we like to lock ourselves in little garrets and play with words instead. And the publishers are very enamored of people who are willing to appear in the media. From the feedback that I get from Penguin, it's actually quite unusual that an author will even agree to go on to things like a radio interview, a television interview, and so forth. And I'm very much the opposite kind of creature. I will, if there's a camera in the room, I'll stick myself in front of it and talk about a book. And the result of that, of course, is that the publishers like that. And when you propose the next book, they have the sense that you get involved in the marketing. There's a joke that does the rounds in the world of public speaking and presenting, where whenever there are surveys in which people are asked, what is your number one fear? Death typically comes second and public speaking first. And I think that's possibly even worse for typically introverted writer types. And yet at the same time, no one is actually asking a writer to go out and, knock on doors and sell their books one by one. Really what they're asking for is just the willingness to be interviewed, to mention your book on social media, things of that nature. When you start doing it, it's actually not that bad, but it certainly does count. Publishers, after all, are, they have a business model. Their goal is to sell books. And in the background, my interaction with them has been that they can be quite altruistic and that they can have very high artistic standards, but right in the foreground, first and foremost, they have to sell books, and our willingness to get involved with that makes a very big difference, and in fact is quite a useful part of your pitch. When you first approach a publisher, they'll take you that more seriously if you already have existing platforms or just express the willingness to do it.
So would you recommend writers who are particularly shy and introverted and all they want to do is write their books, but they also want their books published, but they're too afraid to go out there into the public. Would you recommend that they do something like Toastmasters?
Yes, you can never go wrong with Toastmasters, and I'll actually give you a few reasons for that. Although it's ostensibly a public speaking organization, which you would think would not have that much in common with writing, there are many underlying formulas that I find I use extremely often. In the world of speaking, for example, we are often told, and this is something that you'll hear a lot from very high-level professional speakers, they'll say the best writing, the best communication, the best speaking essentially follows the formula: make a point, tell a story. Make another point, tell another story. Yes. And it's the stories that make it come alive. And when you start sort of looking about for writers who agree with that, a very good one, if you get the chance, do pick up Steven Pinker. Steven is a cognitive psychologist, and he has a book called The Sense of Style. The Sense of Style by Steven Pinker. And he comes at it from the perspective of how the brain works. And he says, while the brain is perfectly capable of processing dots and dashes and graphs and charts and numbers, abstract representation, it doesn't light us up. What does light us up is storytelling. And that can be as classical as telling an actual story, or it can be just the use of picture metaphors and similes and anything that the brain can, any mechanism by which the brain can take an idea and see something in moving pictures. And the degree to which we speak in moving pictures is often the degree to which our ideas come alive. And it works equally well in writing and in speaking. So you start to see those underpinning patterns. And then getting back to the publicity side of things, yes, absolutely. If you are terrified of appearing in front of a camera, you can really do no better than joining something like Toastmasters. There is another option on the table as well. There is a group called Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa. Now, where Toastmasters is the how-to of standing up in front of an audience and delivering a message, the PSA, Professional Speakers Association, is essentially the business side of being a speaker. And if the nature of your writing tends toward things like coaching, public speaking appearances, media appearances, and so forth, you will find that your writing almost by default creates a speaking career for you. And then that becomes a very good one. It gives you insights in terms of how you can charge, how you can monetize your entire business model, and so forth. A name that you might be familiar with, if you've ever listened to, say, Talk Radio 702 or any of the television talk shows in South Africa, you might have encountered Nikki Bush. Nikki Bush is a family friend of ours. She's a professional speaker and author in the world of child development. And she's a great example of how writing books creates a speaking career, and the speaking career tends toward more books and so forth. In fact, at the moment, we were chatting just 2 days ago, and Penguin is waiting on her for the next manuscript, but she's so busy, she's actually pushed out her publishing deadline for that one. So clearly the two build on one another and create a virtuous cycle.
There we go. And as you say, it's that virtual cycle. Success breeds success.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and I think that this is what we as writers, especially working on your own, this is what we need.
Absolutely. And in fact, picking up on that theme, there are ways in which you can manufacture that by design. If, for example, you haven't sold your first book, you can find smaller ways in which to get your message or your name, your brand essentially out there in the public eye. And each little instance of credibility adds up to something that publishers will consider. So let's say, for example, if you are writing a business book like myself, you could start off by writing for the Star Workplace or one of the local newspapers and just getting an article in there. And if you do that a few times, it's very likely that you'd be able to get yourself onto Talk Radio 702. And with a few of those appearances, you approach the publisher and you say, I am active in the media in the following ways, here's my proposal. And by doing that, you've actually generated the credibility necessary to get there. It's also interesting how much the relationship with the publishers changes as a result of that. The first one that I published with Penguin, like all authors, was done the hard, cold, formal way and with sort of obedience of all of the rules. And that book was, in fact, let me just grab it here. That was this little guy, Own Your Industry, How to Position Yourself as an Expert. This is a book on basically personal branding, how to stand out as the big name in. And Penguin didn't know me at the time that I proposed it. So it was all the cold, formal process that authors are so horribly familiar with, where you send your proposal and all of a sudden, nothing happens. And then perhaps 3 weeks later, you receive this very cautiously worded email saying, with no promises made, send us your synopsis. And if you haven't heard from us in 6 months, please get on with your life. So you send that through, and then 3 weeks later, you get another coldly, formally worded email saying, please send the first chapters. And if you haven't heard from us in 6 months, get on with your life. And after eventually moving slowly through that process, we published the first one. Now, 6 books down the line, the relationship has so dramatically changed that when I proposed book number 7, it went like this. Hi, Ronelle, I have this idea for a book. What do you think? And 5 minutes later, my email comes back and it says, hi, Doug, sounds good. We'll do it next year, February. Let us know when you're done.
Right.
Done.
Right.
So that awful relationship that we have with these closed doors and mysterious people in towers somewhere changes dramatically over time. And a large part of that change is our willingness to be interviewed, to be out there in the public, to build the brand, and to market the books in subtle but effective ways.
Yeah. But you also delivered the goods. You know,
Well, I don't like to brag, but now that you mention it.
but you know, your editors need to have the confidence that when you say yes, you are going to be able to bring a book to the table. And actually that answered my next question, which was going to be, when did you get your first lucky break? So it's good to know that you had it just as hard as everybody else. And I think what happens is that we lose faith, we lose hope, we lose courage, we lose confidence. We kind of like think, well, I knew I couldn't do it anyway. It was only my friends who said this would make a good book and I should try and
I'll give you an insight into the emotion behind that one. This first one, Own Your Industry, was published in 2014. So this is not a long period of time we're talking about here, which means it was written in 2013. And for years after that, even up until very recently, I've had that sense of imposter syndrome, that who am I? And also this weird sort of idea that one day I'll wake up and discover it's not really true. And I think that's something that all writers go through, that sense of, I'm just this human being in the background, and I've been sort of scraping together this attempt at a career. And when it works, we almost don't believe it. So that never really goes away. And perhaps that's useful to know. Even for someone who's published a few books, it never changes.
I can understand that feeling, because especially like the way this year has gone, Douglas.
Yeah.
It's gone belly up for many people who were successful in many avenues, and even people who were just waiting on successes to materialize. Everything has fallen flat, and I think it really has pulled the carpet from underneath a lot of people, and that's why we need motivational speakers like you. And that's been one of the boons of COVID, is that we have been able to connect with amazing people, even internationally. So speaking about internationally, do you find that it's easier to get your books published abroad or here in South Africa?
Very definitely here. And in my case, it was premised on something of a speaking reputation prior to the publication of the first book. However, having said that, if you are an absolutely ideal fit with a publisher, then I don't think that geography matters. It becomes a negative if you are part of what we might call a massive slush fund of generic writers. And I don't mean that in any unkind way. What I mean is, if you're writing the sort of thing that is published broadly by many different publishers around the world, and there's nothing distinctive about you, the brand, then it's very difficult to get through that. However, if, for example, you are, let's use an extreme one, you are at the forefront of some form of medical research, and that nation publishes medical research and it is exactly the same thing, then it's a no-brainer. It's easy to get through. So I think it really just does differ from case to case. Here, for example, we don't have to have literary agents. I've never worked with one. You certainly tend to need them more in markets like the US and the UK. But that said, my book coming out in the US was not through a literary agent. So it's not an absolute necessity. And an interesting thing there as well, that credibility that by which they judge whether or not they'd like to work with you does not have to be academic. And I think that's actually quite an interesting point.
Okay.
You do not have to have a PhD in to be taken seriously. You simply have to answer the question, why this person? And to a large extent, that is something that you can create, manufacture, or generate. And if you have that and you show willingness to work with the publishers, often that's enough to tip the scales. I will just add to that I've had many instances of book proposals that were turned down, both by Penguin and by other publishers that I've never worked with.
Okay. So, in other words, you're saying, first of all, you need to have that courage of conviction that this is good writing, and you are prepared to go out there and talk about why you've written something and why you're passionate about the subject. And then again, it also helps if you have a particular genre that you're writing in. And the more unique this genre is, then the more likely people are going to pick up their ears and be a little bit.
Yes. Now, let's play devil's advocate. Let's assume you don't have any of that and that you are writing a very mainstream thing that many different publishers publish, and there are thousands of competing authors. Then a few dynamics change. You have to stand out in your submission to the publisher. And a little bit of sort of insider information from just chatting with some of the publishers. They will tend to dismiss manuscripts if they are not formatted correctly. So if, for example, you target someone like, say, Pan Macmillan, the publisher, the first step always is to go onto their website and look at their submissions page, where they will list exactly how they want to receive submissions. Right. And if, for example, they say send one page only and you send two, they go, aha, and it's out. So it's not worth playing fast and loose with those guidelines. If they say to send it in a certain way, do that and do that only. If they say submit in, say, single line spacing, don't send them double line spacing. It sounds ridiculous and it sounds petty, but many of these folks are looking to effectively dismiss up to 50 manuscripts in a day. So their first thing is just to look at the manuscript and go, they haven't bothered to do what we asked for, gone. Okay. Then the next thing, and I think this is quite useful, this comes from the editors at Penguin. I just over a casual chat, I said, can you tell these days which manuscript submissions have potential, just kind of by glancing at them? And the editor said, absolutely. In fact, it's down to the first paragraph. And she says, generally speaking, the distinction is this. A new author will tend to ramble in the first paragraph, whereas a manuscript that is very likely to get through round one will frame the issue tightly and compellingly in the first sentence and possibly the first paragraph. And she says you can just see it. It jumps out at you. This difference between kind of this long rambling build up to versus someone who just frames the question and gets right to the heart of the issue in paragraph one. So it's well worth paying a lot of attention to that first paragraph.
Okay. And this all comes with experience, Douglas?
Yeah, and these are just things you pick up along the way. I mean, like I mentioned, that conversation with an editor, that was about 1.5 years ago. And I just happened to have that conversation and ask that question. So, you know, all of these things they're just things you learn along the way as you get involved in this industry. But there's no reason to learn it the slow way, which I think is to your great credit in having conferences like this where you share ideas. Yes. There are simple mistakes that you don't have to make. And in many cases, those mistakes are disqualifying. So don't make them.
Right. That's great. That's great. It's good to hear these things because we often wonder where are we going wrong. So I should imagine that personal wealth books are successful sellers. Everybody wants to get rich quick. So, what made you a fundi on the subject? I mean, how to be successful in business? You know, there are lots of business people out there who have made bungles, and then they've written about their experiences, and you know, teaching other people to learn from their mistakes. Yeah, so, you know, in business, and this is what we really, really need now, these how-to business books, how do I make a fortune? And I know a lot of these books are, you know, make your fortune in 2 weeks, or send me 3,000 rand and I will double your profits
Yes.
and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll put
so
my banking
how did you
details up
get
on the
into
screen
this
so that
market?
you can do likewise. Yeah.
Yeah.
In my particular case, writing those books was inspired by a couple of things. The first one
Okay.
is a deep dislike for get-rich-quick books, paired to a love for real answers over politically correct answers. I grew up in a family that struggled quite badly financially when I was very young. And I lived in an area that was relatively wealthy. So I was extremely sort of conscious of how much we were struggling relative to the people around us. And it just became a point of study for me to find out what are the differences in thinking and what really works and what doesn't. And there's an amazing amount of very good scholarship on this topic, as opposed to the sort of the cheap hit and run, get rich quick books. And I'm interested in the scholarship. Now, my books are not particularly academic in nature, but I do rely on genuine economic studies in terms of what actually works. And I'll give you a simple example of the sort of political correctness versus what actually works. There's a group called the Brookings Institute in the United States, and they have, over the course of some 40 years, asked simple questions like, how do people escape poverty? What works? What doesn't? What should we be recommending? And they come to the interesting conclusion that the top two answers are not taught because they're politically incorrect. And the top two answers, the two major determinants of people's upward or downward trajectory, are number one, work ethic. In other words, it's in your hands. And the second one is faithful maintenance of a family, or in other words, not having children very young out of wedlock. Now, in a nation like ours, of course, with our sort of social systems, the government essentially incentivizes young girls to have babies soon, and then takes the place of the traditional husband. It is the exact opposite of the formula that works in terms of lifting people out of poverty. So it's that sort of thing that fascinates me, rather than the kind of get rich quick ideas. It's the genuine studies on what has worked in human history versus what sounds nice but does the opposite. And that's the kind of thing that fascinates me.
Okay. And it's very interesting that putting into practice very often does link up directly with your childhood and your upbringing.
Yeah.
Because you know what you're talking about. And I think many South Africans live in this double standard situation.
Yeah.
Where I'm thinking about children who come from townships into Model C schools. They live one life in the afternoon, and at night they live another life when they come into school in the mornings. And we often wonder, how do we overcome this the poverty restrictions of who you are, where you were born, how you grew up, what your situation was. And I think a lot of people go through life kind of like blaming it on their childhood and their background, whereas in actual fact they could turn it around like you have done, and you have made it work for you.
And the worst part of that is that politicians are essentially incentivized to play on that. How much of a victim you are. It serves them politically, and that is a massive problem that we face. We're going a little off track here, but if that kind of topic matter interests you, the best author to follow, Dr. Thomas Sowell, an economist from the United States, and his surname is spelled Sowell. Now, he does the bigger version of what I love, which is to track historical trends and to sort of dispel ideas that we think help, but actually do a great deal of damage. Dr. Thomas Sowell grew up in Harlem, and himself, he also escaped poverty and is now fascinated by what works over generations. Very, very interesting stuff. Bringing it back to the world of writing, you mentioned the idea of a person who's, for example, got one foot in a sort of a township lifestyle and one foot in potentially wealth, and sort of a very high-tech lifestyle. That in itself can be an excuse for publication. I mentioned earlier on that you don't necessarily have to have, say, the doctorate or the academic qualification to get anywhere with a publisher. If you have a unique personal angle, that can often be a reason for your book to exist as well. Generally speaking, what a publisher looks for, if you are writing about one particular genre or type of idea, they will ask the simple question, how do you move this forward? So you can't simply repeat all the past books that have been written about it. You have to do something that is in some way a little new, a little novel, a little different. And just being a person who comes at it from a different angle can be enough to answer that question. I often recommend, whenever I speak with writers about this, I say you've got to have read at least the top 4 or 5 new best-selling books in your world, in your industry each year. And there are several reasons for that. The first is to see what works, because those books have been published. And there is no doubt that understanding successful writers gives you the sort of underpinning formulas for successful writing. The second one is because of falsification. Basic way in which academics and science progresses is someone proposes an idea, we test it. If it is proven false, it does not continue. What happens is year by year in all of our fields, ideas are falsified and they are proven to be untrue. And unless you are up to date with all the latest books, it's very easy to repeat things that were believed as little as 5-6 years ago, but which are now perhaps discredited or outdated. So it is extremely important just to be reading broadly within your world and within your industry. Terry Pratchett then goes one step further and he says, if you want to be a fiction or a fantasy writer, he says, you've already read enough fantasy books. Go read some history, go read some science, go read something else that just broadens your worldview.
Okay, so that brings me to my next point. You mentioned something about philosophical writing.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about that and where you find your inspiration.
So here's the train of thought on this one. I mentioned earlier that I grew up in a family that struggled financially, and I was interested in real answers versus politically correct answers. And my first point of study was the world of economics, where again, politicians are very adept at telling people that they are victims and have been in different scenarios around the world. There is always a grain of truth in it. But when you buy into a total victimhood mentality, you do not fundamentally believe that work ethic can change your trajectory. And it turns out, by research by the Brookings Institute, to be the number one thing that changes your trajectory. So I then became interested in what else we believe that is considered politically correct and very nice, and it's sort of taken as gospel. That simply isn't true. And based on that, the new book is called Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. And it's subtitled How to Identify, Debunk, and Dismantle Dangerous Ideas. And that one is being published by a group in the United States. It comes out actually in the next couple of weeks. And I was delighted to see yesterday, on Friday, that the pre-orders button just went live on Amazon. So I can now actually start doing some media, creating videos, writing articles that help to support it. There was no point in doing that prior to this because you can't send buyers anywhere. But now I can. And that comes out in the States in a couple of weeks' time.
Well done, and a very inviting title, I must say.
Actually, that's a good point. Funny enough, this is another conversation that I had with one of the editors at Penguin, who said it's amazing how confrontational titles work. They jump off the shelves and people actually tend to like them. So we tend to think that we have to couch ideas in very careful terms. The publishers are not that cautious. They actually want something that possibly riles feathers and so forth. What I don't like, and this is just my personal opinion, is the use of expletives and swear words and so on as part of a title. And that's become very popular lately. I can't wait for that trend to die out. I can't stand it. However, just the idea of a sort of a feisty title, it works, and it's very popular.
Well, on that line, writing has changed hugely.
Yeah.
In the last decade, sentence construction, word count, language, simplicity, titles, it's all changed. So you make a very valid point that it is very important for writers to keep a finger on the button and stay up to date
And
if
I
you want
really
to
would
get your
recommend that
writing.
Steven Pinker book for that particular one. Steven
Okay.
Pinker, as a scientist himself, does not recommend simplistic writing, but he does give simple devices that are modern. And just a simple example of that, he says these days, whether you're writing a science textbook or a business nonfiction guide, the tone that is generally preferred by publishers will tend to sound like a one-on-one conversation. So
Okay.
whereas academic writing is disembodied and removed from any relationship with the reader, the kind of writing that gets published today by the Penguins and Pan Macmillans and so forth tends to sound like me talking to you one-on-one. And it's little insights like that he gives along the way that just show you what works these days. And it's actually quite inspiring in the sense that he's not dumbing it down. In many ways, he shows how to improve your writing by understanding those concepts. If I had my way, I'd go back to sort of Tolkien-esque or even Shakespearean language. That's what I love. But yes, it certainly is changing.
So, what is the best advice another writer has given you?
Quite probably Stephen King. Obviously, indirectly, I'm not even going to lay claim to... one day, Stevie and I were chatting around the water cooler, and he says in his book On Writing, which is also a very, very good one, he says you should write with the door closed and then open it, by which he means we tend to have the sort of extreme, powerful, raw version of what we want to say. And he says, you must close the door and allow yourself to say that as though no one is listening. Don't be worried by what your Aunt Agatha might think of your writing at a later stage. You write with the door closed with full intensity and full honesty. Then you open the door and you let people see it. And I think that's quite an interesting take on the courage to write fully rather than to sort of withhold. And I think that is extraordinarily good advice.
Yes. I think that is a mistake that all new writers make, is that you start from the beginning and you think every sentence is going to be perfect and my vocabulary is going to be absolutely amazing and my reader is going to be stunned by what I'm saying here. And that really does hold you up, whereas if you just let yourself go and just write freely from your heart. And let's face it, writing is very personal. Very often I feel as though I'm standing on a stage naked when I've written something and put it out there for other people to read. And I do find, because I am a blogger, I do find that when I write more personal things about what's been happening in my life, I get a lot more likes. And then when I'm kind of like generic and speaking about
absolutely. And really, that is where the power lies. I mean, even if, for example, in my business books, if I'm talking about something to do with wealth, I will deliver deeply personal stories because I know that's what works. That's what makes the idea come alive. And, if you don't even have to do it with reference to your own life. If you are able to tell a hypothetical story, but you do it in such a way that the reader can feel themselves, their life, their experience through that writing, you will have made it come alive. And really, I think that is the key to all good writing, in my opinion, is it's not the delivery of the idea, it's the degree to which you make it come alive. And that's what we're after ultimately.
Right. And it takes courage.
Absolutely,
It does take courage. All right. I mean, I could speak to you for ages. This is just what we need at this time of COVID. I don't know how any of the other members are feeling, but I think we've really been scraping the bottom of the barrel. And, if you kind of like alone and at home and working on your own, it's really, really very, very difficult. And that's the whole benefit of being a member of Writers 2000 is that we're in this together. We're here to help each other. We're here to pull one another up. So, Douglas, give us a take-home message that, we're going to leave this meeting and we're going to think, wow, this is what I'm going to put into practice. Give us a
Let's perhaps go with the simplest one of all, which is that it is eminently possible. Publishers publish new books every single month, and they publish thousands of new books every single month. If you are able to capture their attention with something dynamic, if you're able to ensure that your first paragraph frames the issue in a powerful and compelling way. If you're proposing a darn good book, it is not impossible to get published. What we perceive as sort of an iron curtain between ourselves and the world of publishing is really in no way magical. There are simple things you can learn about how to raise the quality of your writing. There are simple guidelines you should follow in terms of how to submit your manuscript. And if you simply keep at it, it absolutely can be done. I think we tend to give up too easily because writers are often quite emotional creatures, and it really is a game of numbers. The worst thing you can do is to take a rejection as a rejection of you as the human being. I've had one book turned down by one publisher and accepted by another. It's no reflection on you. It does not represent divine judgment upon your soul. It's not the end of your life. When you start to really think of this as just a business, it changes everything. I also think we tend to put ourselves off when we think about the scale of a project we want to attempt. And I often give the advice that you shouldn't think about writing a book in the same way that you would think about scaling a mountain. It's not like that. A book is a longer essay than usual. So start writing your essay. And also don't give yourself 10 years to do it. Get it done by next month. You can write an entire book over a 2-3 month period. It is not even all that hard to do if you're just consistent day to day. If you are writing, say, 1,000 words a day, which for some people is a big ask, for others is maybe not terribly much, within 30 days, you've got essentially the basis of a book. You've got 30,000 words. 2 months is 60,000 words. That's a relatively full-sized book. So it's that perception of the emotional weight of the thing that tends to stop us. Write the book. It's about getting the writing done, not about dreaming of being a writer one day. My best year so far is 3 books in 1 year.
Okay, well done. Douglas, can you leave us some contact details, your website, so that people can have a look and see what you've done, where you've spoken?
Very gladly.
Do you do any training for writers? Do you hold writers' hands? Do you do any editing?
Do you know, I don't really, but I have created a few things that are about the world of writing. So, for example, if you go onto YouTube and you just search for my name, for Douglas Kruger, I have a little sort of almost daily video called From Amateur to Expert, in which I talk about how to become the top name, the top brand, whatever in your world. And one of those videos is an hour-long sort of mini seminar on how to become a published writer. And it's all available for free if you care to sit through an entire video like that. Alternatively, I'm a big fan of audiobooks, and I recently put together a little downloadable Audible mini seminar of about 1 hour and 45 minutes called The Complete Tiny Little Guide to Becoming an Author. And it's a lot of the concepts that we've covered today and a lot more. And it's really sort of from one end to the other, how to structure your thoughts, write your ideas, create your book, how to approach the publishers, how to avoid all the common mistakes and so forth. That one is obviously a paid product. You have to buy it and download it. But the YouTube video is absolutely free. And then in terms of coaching, no, not really, but I'm very open to answering emails if anyone has specific questions and things of that nature. And I love joining groups like this. So, you know, if you ever want to have me back, please just ask. I'd be absolutely delighted to. My website is douglaskruger.com, and just my name, douglaskruger.com. And there is a website now for the new book on political correctness titled breakingwoke.com. So woke as in sort of very politically correct, breakingwoke.com. And that is a sort of a support for that book, which comes out in the US in a couple of weeks' time. Oh, and all of my books are available on Audible as well. In fact, it's something we haven't covered, but you're looking at the little microphone here. I read my own books for the audio platforms. So that's something that helps quite a lot. And it actually represents an interesting revenue stream as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, great. You know, it strikes me that you prepare to give more than you expect in return, and I think that is a feather in your cap.
Well, thank you. I've had so many people help me with my speaking career, my writing career, and so forth. And, you know, it makes such a difference when someone has gone through it, they know what mistakes you're making, and they're willing to share their journey. So it's an absolute pleasure to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great stuff.
This has been wonderful. I'm sure everybody agrees.
Thank you. Certainly. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Well, much appreciated.
Cool.
Thanks.
Were there any questions that came up, Megan?
Megan's
Any
gone.
questions? Megan. Does anybody who's live, do you have any questions for Douglas?
Tell you what, one passing thought, if any, while people are sort of mulling over any potential questions, one way of thinking about this COVID lockdown crisis relative to writing, my speaking career virtually disappeared over this time because, of course, I'm a live event and we haven't been able to do that. And I found that a good way of thinking about yourself, if particularly for nonfiction writers, if you do something that is in any way a guide, a way of teaching, a way of training, good way to think about yourself is imagine a blank white page and you are at the center of what is essentially a spider diagram. And there are multiple revenue streams. There are the books, there are the audio books, there are the YouTube videos, there are the online courses, and so forth. I'm very fortunate in that I have a monetized YouTube channel, which actually brings in a little bit of money every month. The audio books do, the paperback books do as well. And there are many different ways in which you can take the core thing you do and monetize that and make a career out of it. There's even a forum called Patreon, where if people like whatever artistic production you put out there, they can consider sponsoring you on a monthly basis. Now, I've just found out about that one. I'm keen to explore it. But it's interesting to note that writing may not be the only way in which you can make a career out of the thing you love. The book itself gives you credibility, and it's one revenue stream, but it's by no means the only one.
That's interesting. That's interesting. How could we learn more about that, Douglas?
Well, I tell you, probably the best place to start is YouTube for any of that. My daily videos are about how to position yourself as this expert, and those are the kinds of things that I talk about. But if you had to put a search into YouTube for any of those ideas, such as how to launch a monetized YouTube channel, how to apply to Patreon to have your own patrons pay you every month, how to make a career out of your knowledge, any of those kinds of searches will bring up really good material, and you can spend a great afternoon just kind of scanning through videos, all of which are very useful.
Okay. Well, you're a great source of inspiration, just what we needed at this time.
Well,
thank you so much, Doug.